Before we get into our regular episode, we are going to be kicking off our Eddie Murphy month here. We absolutely needed to do a couple of tributes and mention a couple of people who've recently passed away. We did not mention the passing of David Lynch, and I think part of it is because I'm not speaking for Brian, but I'm not the biggest David Lynch fan, and it would just be really awkward to talk about him for a few minutes just because none of his movies have really resonated with me. I think that he is undoubtedly an extremely powerful figure, and he has undoubtedly had a major influence on the way movies are made and even television shows. He is undoubtedly very popular with a certain element of film Twitter. And look, I'm extremely glad he exists. And his cameo at the end of Meeting the Fablemans was pretty great, but it just didn't feel right to tribute to have a tribute for him because again, like I said, not the biggest fan of his work. So it was just really tough. Brian, anything to add?
I'm a really big fan of Blue Velvet, but Dune is another one I like only because I love the visuals of it. But I know that the script has just been chopped to pieces and it's been this horror story for David Lynch. But other than that, like I thought like stuff like Lost Highway was kind of like over my head. A lot of his stuff kind of goes over my head, but something about Blue Velvet just really stuck out with me because that's probably his more traditional storyline movie. The kind of the murder mystery. He finds the toe or whatever in the backyard, or not the toe, but the finger or whatever it was, and the mystery goes from there. So I think Blue Velvet kind of really sticks out the most for me. I don't think it's this incredible classic, but I think it's a great murder mystery. But other than that, like David Lynch doesn't again really stick with me because he kind of goes over my head. That's not his fault. It's just he's kind of like a stubborn director, and that's what he was known for. And you can hear these stories about him on set yelling at people. Like there's that one infamous clip that goes around like, "Why do we need to trim the fucking shot? Let's just give the fucking shot the time it fucking needs. God damn it!" And that's David Lynch. So more power to him. Rest in power. But man, like he was a stubborn director that always got his way or tried to get his way, and more power to him for that.
Undoubtedly, somebody that will be missed. Incredibly, it feels like I have more of a connection to somebody who was probably far less well known in the film business. That would be Michelle Trachtenberg. For me, Michelle Trachtenberg is Dawn from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She is also Harriet from Harriet the Spy. She was also in Pete and Pete, Gossip Girl, as well. And the tragedy of her death is that she passed away at the age of 39 and had to deal with so much trauma that we know of from Joss Whedon to the point where Joss Whedon wasn't allowed to be in the same room with her. And we will ultimately never know her true cause of death because the family, they just want their privacy respected, and that is totally understandable, totally reasonable. But what she had to go through is just incredibly tragic, and we are going to be getting a reboot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, kind of a legacy sequel. It is unfortunate that Michelle Trachtenberg will not be able to be a part of that reboot, but I really hope that they find a way to do a nice tribute to her. And of course, she was also in Eurotrip as well, which is kind of an underrated comedy. And I think if we had not kind of planned this month out, I think I've would have almost suggested doing a kind of a re-examination of Eurotrip. But Brian, any feelings on Michelle Trachtenberg?
Harriet the Spy, man, never gonna forget that. Was it the summer of '96 or something like that? It came out '97. It was one of those summer movies. It was one of the first Nickelodeon movies, and I think it was just a cool experience, man. Because seeing child actors get the starlight, or the top billing, it's really fun as a kid to see those kind of things. And she was like one of the top, I don't know, child actresses at the time, I guess. And it made sense because that role was really like kind of heavy at times. So Harriet the Spy, man, just that movie really sticks out with me as a kid. Taught me a lot about responsibility as a kid and not to like rat out people or insult people behind their back kind of thing and write these nasty things about them. So that's kind of the life lesson of that movie. But that's kind of what I remember for. I didn't really watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer too much. I watched the first season, and that was kind of it for me. But again, Eurotrip, I have this weird connection to it where, as you know, in Eurotrip, she plays twin. And my English teacher, ninth grade English teacher, she dated the actor that played the male twin, and he actually came to class one time, and we didn't realize it until later on, and then Eurotrip kind of came out, and we were like, "Oh shit, that is the actor from Eurotrip." So it was pretty interesting, man. But the weird connection there. But yeah, it's unfortunate. It's a tragic story, but yeah, privacy for the family. But you know, it just sucks because 39 and all the trauma she went through. But hopefully she's at peace now.
I mean, I'm 39 years old, so I think it resonates with me for that reason as well. The fact that we are the same age. He was born just a couple months after me, so it's definitely this hits very hard. And of course, I mean, look, 95 years young is certainly a long and fulfilling life. The person that we are going to talk about last is Gene Hackman, and what a career. It's unbelievable to me that this man has been retired for 20 years. There is an entire generation of people that have not seen a Gene Hackman movie or were around and cognizant enough to know that he was an actor. And he got to spend 20 years in retirement. You know, basically after Welcome to Mooseport, he decided that he had had enough, and he went to go live in New Mexico. And I don't really want, I certainly don't want to get into any potential, controversy with how his life ended. But the fact that he got to live 20 years kind of away from the limelight, with the exception of a few voiceovers, and just living seemingly peacefully with his wife and his dogs, I think that's wonderful. And I think that Gene Hackman as an actor is also wonderful. And I have spent part of the weekend that we are recording watching and enjoying and appreciating Gene Hackman's movies. I mean, he's done 70 movies, and you look at his 8 tracks. I mean, he is just, you're talking about The French Connection and Unforgiven, 2 movies he won an Academy Award for. You look at the fact that he was in like the very first superhero movie as well. I mean, he is unbelievable as a performer. And then you go to his B tracks. I mean, you look at movies like Night Moves, movies that probably will not be at the top of your list. But Gene Hackman has such a depth and such a rewarding filmography, and just the diversity of his movies is unbelievable to me. It is incredibly sad that we lost him, but what a career.
Yeah, man. It's just kind of strange too, because again, I've been mentioning like I've been watching a lot of Siskel and Ebert rabbit hole playlists about different years throughout the years, and Gene Hackman is constantly coming up throughout these times, obviously because these are kind of like his prime end years, the 80s and 90s. And it made me kind of want to go back and watch some old stuff that I haven't seen. Like there's this movie called Loose Cannons on Tubi that's got a really bad rating, but it's got a Dan Aykroyd in it, and they're cops, so it's just like it can't be that bad, can it? So it's got me curious. It's finally got me interested in watching Mississippi Burning because I kind of, I've known about the movie. I never really want to watch the movie, but then after watching the review and then about his passing and then kind of going back and seeing it was like a Willem Dafoe co-starring role as well. So I might actually check out Mississippi Burning. I heard that's really, really intense racial drama, and Gene Hackman apparently knocks it out of the park along with his co-stars. So I'm interested in some of his older movies that I haven't seen now, and I might check them out. I'm not gonna watch Welcome to Mooseport, that's for sure. But I mean, his career is legendary, and he went out on his own terms, so that's really, that's quite admirable. Because we know some actors are just gonna be acting until they die, or directing until they die, like Clint Eastwood or Dick Van Dyke. If you ask Dick Van Dyke right now to do something for Disney, he'd probably do it in a heartbeat. But Gene Hackman just kind of chose to, kind of wrap it up earlier. And good for him, because I think he was probably a little fed up, probably too. He's been in the system for like 40 years at that point, the Hollywood system. He'd had his run, he had his top billing run, and he went out his way. And it's kind of unfortunate if you're going to read the story as to what happened, because we all know losing a dog as well is also a heartbreaking thing, and apparently the dog died.
Incredibly so.
Yeah, so our condolences. It's unfortunate, but 95. As Kevin Smith would say, it's a big bucket of win.
So what I want to say about Gene Hackman, I don't want this to be seen as saying something negative against the legendary performers that I'm about to mention, but when I was thinking about Gene Hackman as a performer. And I'm thinking about, the Jack Nicholsons, the Al Pacinos, the Robert De Niros, three unbelievable performers in their own right, all Academy Award winners multiple times. Not Pacino, I should say, incredibly not Pacino, not winning multiple Academy Awards. But you look at those three guys, and at a certain point, those three individuals almost feel like they became parodies of themselves. Pacino with the hoo-has and Scent of a Woman, and just kind of going off the deep end. Jack Nicholson just becoming Jack with a capital J, and just having this persona that carried him for the final 20, 30 years of his career. And even De Niro, I think, has kind of become a parody of himself in so many ways, even though I think he has definitely turned in strong performances in something like Killers of the Flower Moon. But it just seems like those three guys developed this persona and were able to rely on that persona. And Gene Hackman never became a persona. He never became the guy that you could just expect to give the Jack Nicholson performance or the Al Pacino performance. But he was somebody that was so incredibly unique. And even in movies like Superman 4 and The Replacements, he elevated those movies. I have never seen a bad Gene Hackman performance, even if the movie wasn't good, which Superman 4 is in the pile of shame for a reason. It is not because of Gene Hackman. And I think that is one of the great tributes that we could say about somebody, is that you literally elevated every single thing that he was in, and he never became a parody of himself. And he is somebody that should be long remembered as one of the greatest American actors of all time.
Yeah, I would say 1995, man. That was probably one of his last great years. Get Shorty and The Quick and the Dead. We've reviewed The Quick and the Dead. I mean,
and Crimson Tide.
Okay, and Crimson Tide. Yeah, but Crimson Tide's kind of whatever. It's kind of
that movie. I'm sorry, that movie is as good as anything that he's done.
I'm more for Hunt for Red October if you kind of go into that kind of submarine category. But I mean, still.
Gene Hackman is off the deep end of that movie. It's pretty great.
I don't know if your feelings on The Birdcage, but he is so funny in The Birdcage. I feel like The Birdcage is one of the most underappreciated 90s comedies. Gets a lot of TV play, but I think because of the politics in the movie, let's just say, it kind of gets underappreciated, but I think he's so good. And it's more of an ensemble in that movie, but he is so funny in that. And when he has the dress and drag at the end, hilarious, because he's willing to go for it. You know what I'm saying? He's not willing to if this was like, Jack Nicholson? I don't see Jack Nicholson doing drag at the end of a movie, do you? But Gene Hackman, yeah, he's willing to do it.
I mean, I think if Jack Nicholson did it, I think it would be something that wouldn't be taken seriously. And I'm not saying that Gene Hackman in drag is taken seriously, but I think it's done within the context of a character in the movie. And I just don't know that you would get that with some of the other people. I'm glad that you didn't mention Al Pacino in drag, because if you remember one of the movies that he starred in with Adam Sandler, which we don't need to talk about, but that is what we have to say about David Lynch, an unbelievable director. Michelle Trachtenberg, somebody whose life is almost a kind of a tragedy, and of course Gene Hackman living a very long and hopefully rewarding life in terms of both his career and his personal life. So without any further ado, let us get into the regular episode for this week.
Do you know this man? He's the star of Saturday Night Live. He's been called hilarious by the critics, and he's just made his motion picture debut in 48 hours. His name is Eddie Murphy.
I'd like something to drink, preferably some vodka. We best have a Black Russian. No, you already said Black Russian. That's a funny joke. I get it.
Nick Nolte, Eddie Murphy, 48 hours. Rated R.
Third smash week at these fine theaters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast as part of the From the Q Podcasting Network. My name is Jerome Cuson, and as always, we are here to discuss movies and TV. Last month, it was all about Robert Altman. This time, we are going to be celebrating the month of March, not with a tournament theme, but we will be talking about Eddie Murphy. Brian is going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Make sure to follow me on Blue Sky at Jerome C1985. Please leave a 4 or 5 star review on Spotify and Apple to get the algorithms going. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Click the bell icon for notifications for every new episode. Here tonight, we are going to be discussing Eddie Murphy's very first major movie, another Walter Hill joint, as we are discussing 48 Hours. Brian, this is your suggestion for this month, as we are going to be discussing Eddie Murphy. And fittingly, Eddie Murphy been in the news pretty recently because he is one of the people that really stole the show at the Saturday Night Live 50th anniversary special, as he was in two very notable sketches, including one where he was playing Tracy Morgan with Tracy Morgan standing right next to him. And in the other one, he got to play alongside Will Ferrell, probably two of the greatest Saturday Night Live cast members in terms of talent ever. So pretty notable that Eddie Murphy making headlines just as we are about to discuss him here on the Not Content Podcast.
Well, I tried, Jerome. Maybe I try subconsciously sometimes with these dates that I kind of line up for the podcast, but it all kind of worked out, I guess. But the reason I, picked Martian with Murphy month is because I've been kind of wanting to discuss 48 Hours for a long time on this podcast. We couldn't quite fit it in the Walter Hill month because I felt like if we do 48 Hours, we got to do like an all Eddie Murphy month. So we kind of planned it out that way. Last year we did the Walter Hill month. This year we're going to talk about Eddie Murphy. 48 Hours, man. The first big Eddie Murphy movie. And he's not even in until the first 20 minutes, folks. And he just takes over. This movie's 93 minutes. And as soon as he comes in, it just elevates the movie to a whole nother level. Like the movie before Eddie Murphy steps on screen is about a 7. And then it slowly ticks up to about an 8 right when he comes on screen. And this whole dynamic just between him and Nick Nolte is so legendary that people I've seen so many comments on YouTube clips of this movie. It's astonishing, and it goes way beyond the sequel, and you can tell the sequel is kind of forgotten almost, or forgotten out of people's memory just to kind of cherish the memory of the first one. And I gotta say that this 48 Hours movie, second time around watching it in less than 6 months, it's an experience, man, because it's this great visual aesthetic of San Francisco, and at the beginning of this nice aesthetic of this almost 60s kind of background of a chain gang kind of thing with shout outs to Paul Newman and all those different chain gang movies, Sidney Poitier. It kind of has that look, and then all of a sudden it jumps to current time all of a sudden. But man, I love the visual at the beginning, love the visuals of San Francisco, the way it's lit at night. And of course, me and Jerome have this love for 80s saxophone music, and this soundtrack is all 80s sax up and down, mixed with that reggae sound that kind of, you took note of it too. Commando almost has the same musical cues.
There's a very specific musical cue that sounds exactly like Commando. There's a car chase about halfway into this movie, maybe a little bit more than halfway. Feels like it's basically the same music as Commando, and that is because it is the same composer, James Horner. And I believe the same producer, I believe Joel Silver, is the producer of this movie and eventually went on to become the producer of Commando. Some actors are also the same. But yeah, that's very notable.
For sure. And I think this movie, not only was it just a big, box office success, but this literally carried Eddie Murphy to the next level, because he did a movie with Dudley Moore around the same time that was totally shit on by the critics. I forget the title, but even Eddie Murphy makes fun of it on his public appearances around this time, saying that 48 Hours is really truly his breakout movie, and the one he did with Dudley Moore was so bad and forgettable. So I'm always kind of curious. I might look back and check that out because I think it's on Tubi. I forget the title again, but man, that's one of those bad movies of the 80s you hear about, and then it kind of almost cost Eddie Murphy his whole career because it was so bad. But luckily, he bounced back right after that immediately, and I think Walter Hill is the perfect guy to do that, because Walter Hill, man, we've talked about it, but his visual style is so good. Whatever the project he's on, he focuses in and hones in on the visual stylings. Maybe not his 90s movies, we can talk about it another time, but definitely in the 70s and 80s, Walter Hill had this visual style that just works so well. And I thought at times in this movie, maybe there was too many shots of the hills and stuff because it's San Francisco, but the way he shoots it with the sunset and the sunrise and all that kind of thing going on in the background, and the way that the lights are still neon lights from the 80s, and how that just pops in on a 35 millimeter film, it all looked great, man. Especially we can talk about it in a bit, but the bar scene is so good, not just because of the way Eddie Murphy dominates the scene, but I love the look of the bar because it's so uniquely styled, right? Because we saw that in Streets of Fire, where you go to this particular bar in a particular town and it's catered to the people of that town. So he goes to this country bar, and later on we go to like a black bar, and it's a completely different look and vibe. And I like that contrast. You get to see the two sides of town practically in the two different clubs. So these little things in the movie that also coincide with like the chemistry going on. And the fact that I guess, like, I'm going to say it straight up, I think Nick Nolte's a racist in this movie, and he says he's not a racist.
I mean, he
doing
literally
his
calls
job.
Eddie Murphy the N-word to his face, so you don't need to say, I don't think that is a hot take. I mean, he is definitely racist. And I don't think that in 2025 you could have a character be a protagonist and act the way that Nick Nolte does, because, I mean, he flat out crosses the line multiple times. So here's what I want to know. Did Walter Hill get high in his own supply? Because, like, you have to figure, like, coming off of this movie, like, he's the guy that discovered Eddie Murphy and put him in movies. Like, this was kind of his thing and his deal. And I wonder if it affected the casting decisions that he made in Streets of Fire, because let me tell you, the lead of that movie was easily the worst part. And you have to wonder if it wasn't the fact that, you know, Walter Hill is the guy who, again, kind of put Eddie Murphy in this movie. And I'm just wondering if there's a connection there.
Well, if it was my decision, as we kind of go back to that review of Streets of Fire, I would have replaced the main dude. And looking back now, I would have replaced him with James Remar, because he's got the look anyway. He's got that facial look, and it would give James Remar an excuse to not to play a heavy, because he's always seemed to play a heavy or a bad guy in everything he does. But that would have been a fresh change of pace, but that would have been my pick.
It certainly would have been, it would have been a better choice. I don't know that it would have been perfect, but it definitely would have been better.
And speaking of James Remar, he is so good in this movie. Like, we were joking before we recorded that, like, is this the same guy that's like the guy that got arrested at the end of the Warriors, and it's like his same prison stint or whatever? But you know, you can kind of joke around like that, because when it comes to Walter Hill movies, it almost feels like they're all, or mostly all, in the same universe. Like, this definitely feels like it's in the same universe as like the Warriors. And I know that seems kind of odd, but just kind of the vibe and the way it's shot and the attitudes and some of the characters.
I mean, he loves these kind of urban atmospheres, and that, I mean, I think it's represented throughout the entire movie. I think just the way that he is able to kind of put things together, the way that he is able to just give everything a distinct look and make everything feel so unique. That's not something that you get in as many movies as we probably should these days. Just everything being able to capture such a unique look. It's really impressive. And of course, I'm a big fan of this visual style, really, of any director who has a visual style at this point. But, I mean, you also have to consider, like, San Francisco is a very different city in 1982 compared to 2025. If you shot this movie, I'm sure that San Francisco looks completely different, because of gentrification, because the tech industry has taken it over, and it has some of the highest rents in the entire country at this point. And you're not really getting that with, you know, some other potential areas. But I mean, just, you know, living in a big city was very different in the 70s and 80s compared to now. I think if you went to New York or Chicago, I think it would be very similar. Like, these areas are almost treacherous, and now they're in many cases so clean that a lot of the character has been taken away from them. And I'd be very curious to know what somebody who lived in San Francisco, or was a long-term resident of that city, how they would feel about this, because it feels very different than the one that we get. And, you know, we get to see different parts of the city. We also get to see Chinatown as well. We get to see Nick Nolte. How many cigarettes did you clock him at, Brian?
Well, I started at 2 after the first 12 minutes, and then I just lost count because he just spoke so many. But if you compare 48 Hours 2 to the first movie, it's like an 8-year gap. It sounds like he aged 20 years in his voice. That's all because of Nick Nolte smoking. And in comparison, listen to his voice in this movie.
He might be doing other illicit stuff.
Sure. If you like compare this and Cape Fear, like, it's clear the guy aged like 20 years in his vocal cords in the short amount of time he did.
Always looked like he definitely had the Arn Anderson, like, kind of always looked like he was 45 years old. But my God, I mean, it's really noticeable. And by the time you get to Hulk, he's like very scraggly and can barely understand him.
Yeah, absolutely. But in this case, this is kind of like his prime era before the vocal cords take a big hit. And he kind of has this look of like a 70s mid-Atlantic star in the late 70s with the hair. So I like his look. I don't like his attitudes towards women. And you can discuss that because he's a son of a bitch, not telling all the details about his relationship with his girlfriend or quote unquote, one woman I'm seeing. And that would be Annette O'Toole, who just, he was a big face in the 80s and 90s, and you'll definitely recognize her. And she's, in Superman 3, she did it right after this, so credit to her for sticking to it, because she was a very minor role in this, and the last time we see her is on the phone, and there's no resolution to her character whatsoever. But that's what's kind of unfortunate, because they kind of set this thing up where it's like going to be this big fight they had at the beginning, and then you expected to have this big, like, I love you at the end, or blah, 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 and they didn't have that at all. So I don't know what the hell is going on there, but Nick Nolte's character is not great with women. But not a lot of the characters in this movie are great with women at all, actually, because, like, Sonny Landham is, like, abusing his girlfriend, and then Denise Crosby's being used by James Remar at the end. So there's a lot of bad dudes in this movie treating women poorly, but at the same time, it's kind of like a lesson as to not, how to treat women and stuff. And women are very much in the background of this movie. Just used as like objects.
It's the dude's movie for sure.
For sure, but at the same time, it's like, you got to look at these like David Patrick Kelly and Sonny Landham and all these different heavy characters you've seen before, and it's kind of like, okay, they have this ensemble of bad guys, and they kind of get through them, but at the same time,
Jonathan Banks. Don't forget Jonathan Banks.
Jonathan Banks, right? And then, of course, I want to talk about this really quickly, like, that scene where Jonathan Banks gets killed, man, it just hits harder now, I guess, because you realize that at the beginning they were kind of joking with each other, him and Nick Nolte. It's almost as if they didn't like each other. But once they're in the battlefield, right, and he's shot, and he's like, do not sacrifice yourself for me. I'm already gone, kind of thing. And he does it anyway, Nick Nolte. And you can tell the emotion of Jonathan Banks' character is like, okay, this guy does care about me. We do joke about each other, but I'm about to die, but this guy's trying to save me anyway, kind of thing. So that was a really, like, small, powerful moment in terms of, like, a Walter Hill realistic cop moment.
I mean, it's meant to be the inciting incident that sends Nick Nolte to the point where he is desperate enough to use a convict to help him try to crack the case. I mean, that's really what this is, and this is why we are supposed to see Nick Nolte's character in a positive light, because of what happens to his friend, and this is supposed to justify everything he does. And I am certainly not going to say that is totally justified. But the one thing I will say is that the scene itself is very powerful. Again, it's shot extremely well. I mean, the gunfights and the car scenes, again, because it's 1982, I think you're looking at it a little bit differently. But I mean, honestly, this is shot a lot better than some of the current movies in terms of like the gun battles, because of how well you can see everything and the fact that everything is well lit. And I just love the way that this movie looks and feels. And I think it really adds to the enjoyment. I think ambiance is something that isn't taken as seriously as it should be, because, just as an example, like you go to see a movie like Captain America, Brave New World, and I'm just sitting there, and it's just like there's like zero ambiance, there's like zero visual panache, and then you sit down and watch something like this, which is not the best movie of all time, of course, but you are able to feel San Francisco. And I know the old cliche is that, oh, New York is like a character in this movie, but like any movie that takes place in this era, that takes place in this urban environment, like that is a part of the character, and you really get that sense with this movie that San Francisco is such a huge part of this. Like you could not shoot this in the desert, you could not shoot this in Atlanta, like because of the car chases are like they're going up and down hills. It has to be San Francisco. And even like the parking garage scene and the look of Chinatown, and just the way that this is executed, and some of the segregation in the city, like you really feel all of that, and I think that's all that is attributable to the direction, as well as I'm sure the producers and the production designer as well all play a role in giving this movie the feel that it does.
And in terms of like the visuals, like you said, I think Eddie Murphy's suit is like kind of iconic almost, because it's like, I don't know, when I think of Eddie Murphy in the 80s, I don't think of like any other role except this role in his suit. And I know that's kind of like a recency bias, but man, it's like that's such an iconic look at him, and that's in that gray patterned suit.
It
I think it's so
absolutely
good.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one quick note I want to add, like for the folks that have seen the sequel and don't like it like I do, there's a character played by Brian James in this movie called Inspector Ben Kehoe, and he's like the bad guy in the second one, and he's been like this undercover, not undercover, but like he's a cop that's a bad guy that's been a drug dealer, like covering up his tracks the whole time for the last 10, 15 years. And in this movie, you get no sense of that whatsoever. It was just this ultimate retcon because it's almost as if they had no ideas for the second one. So it's like, well, we got Brian James again. Maybe we can just make him a bad guy because he looks like a bad guy anyway and always plays the bad guy. And we talked about it when we talked about the player. So I thought it was a nice connection here. And I was thinking, like, man, little did we know that they were going to set him up to be this terrible villain for the second one that has no, like, look, I mean, if you look at the role in this one, he seems like an honest cop. And when they wrote this movie, they had no intention of making him a bad guy in a sequel 6 years or 8 years later. So I thought that was just kind of like, wow, that's a hell of a retcon. And I know we talk about retcons with Marvel, but that's one hell of a retcon because it just seems so out of nowhere. And it seems like he was just available again, so let's just make him the villain. So that was kind of unfortunate for the second one. The second one has a few moments, has a few jokes here and there, but overall I wouldn't recommend it, other than kind of comparing Nick Nolte's voice and the deterioration of his voice in the 8-year period in between. But overall, I give this movie an 8 out of 10. I think it's just so entertaining, classic. Really quick, do you want to talk about the scene in the bar with the country bar and how incredible that is?
I mean, it's a star-making role, and I believe that Walter Hill showed this to Martin Brest, and that is one of the reasons that he got cast in Beverly Hills Cop, was because of his performance in that scene. And I mean, what happens is it's one of the best debuts that you would ever see. And I know that he was in the Dudley Moore movie, but this is really his debut. And I think what makes it so special is the fact that he is able to just go in there, and it feels like he is in complete control, even though he is the only black person in a sea full of not only white people but racist rednecks. I mean, I don't know how this happens in San Francisco, like somebody else. I mean, I have no doubt they're racists in California, but just this very specific brand and the fact that there's Confederate flags everywhere, and the way that Eddie Murphy, like Nick Nolte, gives him permission to act like a cop, which I think is very notable. And it's kind of the first sign of Nick Nolte actually trusting Eddie Murphy to do something. But what I think is so impressive about this movie specifically is the fact that Eddie Murphy is allowed to just control this moment, and not just control the moment, but control it in a way that is both hilarious, but also is thematically consistent with the plot. Because I think it's really easy to be funny, but you have to be funny within the context of the plot of the movie, and I think he's able to do both of those things so well, and that's what I find to be most impressive. And the other thing I want to say about this entire movie really is, like, Nick Nolte is clearly meant to be like the star and the protagonist, but I mean, Eddie Murphy is the guy you walk away from this movie and you're like, well, he's the star. And I always wonder, like, yeah, it took 8 years for there to be a sequel, but I always wonder, like, what did Nick Nolte think of the fact? Because Nick Nolte has to be aware enough that Eddie Murphy is, like, clearly walking away with this movie and clearly is going to be the biggest star of this movie, and to pretend otherwise would be genuinely insane. And I always wonder, like, how did he feel about that? I mean, Walter Hill had to be ecstatic because this movie went on to be very successful and was kind of the launching point for Eddie Murphy's movie career. But, I always wonder about things like that.
Yeah, you kind of look at his career, and it kind of just didn't become like a mega movie star career for Nick Nolte, but like a constant, reliable lead guy in a drama kind of thing, or a small action role kind of thing here and there. And you kind of look at his early '90s career, because to me that's where like Nick Nolte's kind of like known for his more famous stuff around that era, and you can kind of tell he's kind of settled down from that, and he's playing the more dramatic roles like in Cape Fear or whatever. So overall, 8 out of 10, and yeah, I just think this movie is just a fun watch all around, incredible, and that bar scene is the best. It's like the best Eddie Murphy scene, I think, at least top 3.
Oh,
So
I mean, there's some stuff that he does in the first Beverly Hills Cop that is right up there as well. I don't know that there is as singularly an iconic scene that Eddie Murphy has had. And to me, the other thing that that scene specifically, like Eddie Murphy's one of his biggest strengths is his ability to do sketch comedy, and it's not a sketch per se, but it is in the same kind of ballpark. And I think that's another reason that it's so hugely successful because of the fact that it feels like Eddie Murphy is just kind of in a more serious Saturday Night Live sketch. And Eddie Murphy, again, as I stated earlier, is probably one of the best sketch comedians ever. And if it wasn't for Eddie Murphy on SNL, like we don't get to 50 years because the original cast is there for the first 5 years with Lorne Michaels, and then Lorne Michaels takes off. And they really struggled from 1980 until 1985, and they tried different people. And if it wasn't for Eddie Murphy, pretty much carrying the show as a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old, like that show probably doesn't exist as we stand now. And I don't know that Eddie Murphy will ever get the credit that he deserves for keeping that show, carrying that show on his shoulders, really. And I think it's something that probably needs to be talked about more because, again, there's a lot of great SNL cast members. There's a lot of people who deserve like their props, but Eddie Murphy, kind of during the darkest time, is the guy who carried it. Like in so many ways, he's like he's like the Steve Austin of SNL because he came kind of during their darkest hour and really elevated it to the point where it could go on and have another 20, 40, 50-year success.
Well, speaking of the Attitude Era, that leads to the right match because this is a right match podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
It is.
So we decided to do a little rock and sock connection for you because that just kind of seemed like the right kind of vibe of like goofiness mixed with the seriousness, kind of like you get with Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte. So we picked that and we decided to go with the first debut match, August 30th, 1999, against The Undertaker and The Big Show. And I didn't realize there was so much more at the beginning of the episode of Raw to kind of set up this match. So I guess The Rock was beat up by The Big Show and The Undertaker. He was driven through a table at the beginning of the show. Mankind comes out to try to help him. They get beat up. About 40 minutes later, we get The Rock coming out, issuing a handicap challenge to Undertaker and The Big Show, which sounds ridiculous as much as it sounds coming out of my mouth. And then Mankind comes out, and this whole big thing happens where Mankind just gets the crowd on his side and gets the crowd jacked up for the idea of The Rock and Mankind teaming up, and the crowd exploded, and even the commentary team explodes, like, oh my God, what? The famous Jerry Lawler, what?
Well, I mean, the deal was that Rock and Mankind were engaged in a blood feud at the end of '98. The Rock beat Mankind to win the Survivor Series '98 Deadly Game tournament, winning his first WWF title, and Mankind got quote unquote screwed, like Bret Hart did a year prior, and they exchanged the belt going back and forth. They wrestled in November, December, January, February, and The Rock beat Mankind in a ladder match the night after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre to win the title. They wrestled at Sunday Night Heat or Halftime Heat. So Mankind won his first 2 WWF titles by defeating The Rock, including probably one of the more famous Monday Night Wars moments ever, with Mankind beating The Rock while Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash did the finger poke of doom. And that really sealed WCW's fate. And it really just kind of ended the Monday Night Wars in so many ways. Like it would technically go on for another 2 years, but so that's why this was such a big deal, is because not only were Mankind and Rock kind of face and heel against each other, but like they had some of the most memorable Attitude Era matches of all time.
Kind of like in 48 Hours where Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte beat the shit out of each other, which reminded me of that. I mean,
it really does work out. It's funny how that all, I love it when a plan comes together. And in this case, it really does come together because it is not all that dissimilar. Like they hated each other. They beat the crap out of each other, and they decided they have a common enemy and they are going to beat up that common enemy. And I guess, I mean, I'm not going to say they both are, but you could argue that one of them is kind of a racist and a white supremacist. I don't know.
Well, there you go. That's the comparison. We're going to leave it at that for now. But the match itself kind of reflects Undertaker on the way out before he goes to the American Badass. I guess he was injured. Do you know the injury offhand?
I mean, he was just generally like beat up. I mean, because very
Got it.
quickly,
Because I mean, you
I
can
think
see
a
him
week or
limp.
two after,
The dude's
yeah, he
limping
looks
to
he
the
looks
place.
he looks really bad. And yeah, he was. I know he was struggling pretty bad. And yeah, he would go away from August, and he would not come back until May to interfere in the Rock Triple H Iron Man match. Like 9 months later. This is definitely one of those Undertaker breaks that he would take every so often. In '94, it was because I guess he wanted to have a kid with his wife, and that's why he took 8 months off between the Rumble and SummerSlam. But in this case, it was because he was just really, really injured. And funny enough, he was supposed to be in a six-pack challenge with Unforgiven, and the British Bulldog of all people took his place.
Which tells you he had no shot of winning the match at all anyway. So that always was a clue to me when I saw that match as a kid. Like, and they replaced him. I was like, oh, Undertaker was never going to win that match anyway.
That British Bulldog run in '99 is so weird. But like this entire like '99, I know that WWF did record business, but this era is not great in terms of the in ring and even some of the storylines. They're holding it together by a thread, and this Rock Mankind thing is just another pretext. I mean, these two literally had like 3 WWF tag title reigns that went a combined like 2 months.
Yeah, I was about to say that too. And looking at the title history and just looking back at this particular era, right before Austin gets hit by the car, and then it's like the first Triple H run. I felt like this was like a slowdown period, like right after SummerSlam, and we had like Jesse Ventura come in, and it felt like this fall to winter period in '99 was kind of like a slow period for me. And I don't know, I guess it was part of this, like mixed with like the DX coming back and all these different things being thrown at the wall and all these different title changes. But at the same time, this kind of reflects Vince Russo like on his way out. Like he's about to leave in like October, I think. So this is like a right at the end of Vince Russo's like reign, so to speak, in WWF. And I think the match kind of reflects the Attitude Era itself. I mean, it's got chair shots, it's got JR going crazy, it's got, you know, Jerry Lawler going crazy about Mankind, and
Finally,
you got
there.
hello.
Yeah, start again.
Okay. So yeah, I think this match has a lot going for it in terms of like being an Attitude Era match. It's got like the chair shots. It's got Jim Ross going crazy on commentary. It's got Jerry Lawler going crazy on commentary. The crowd is going nuts. And the fact that this takes place in Boston, and I know that because as soon as The Rock hits the Big Show with the chair, and it's a great chair shot, like it was really well done, Jim Ross goes, "The Rock just hit a home run over the Green Monster. He just hit it over the Green Monster." And I was just laughing my ass off because of the visual of, you know, The Rock hitting a home run and the Green Monster and the Boston Red Sox and that kind of feel of nostalgia or whatever. So that was kind of cool. And then the double people's elbow, which I think poor Big Show, I think Mankind elbowed him in the nuts. It looks like it's in the stomach, but I almost think he hit him in the nuts on accident and Big Show just had to take it. And at the same time, this whole thing about the Big Show not being tough enough. If you listen to the commentary, the Undertaker claims that he's trying
I mean,
to.
this is the subtext of Big Show's like first 3 years is the fact that he was either not tough enough or too fat. Like that's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and it sucks because he had to work the match essentially by himself. Undertaker does a few spots with Mankind on the outside, but man, it's like I guess JR was right in a recent not commentary, but I guess on his podcast he recently talked about how they didn't treat him like a big special attraction, and they just treated him like he was just another person on the roster and didn't make him special. And that's kind of what you see when you put the Big Show on TV every single week, as opposed to Andre, who was on TV like once a month back in the day in a certain territory. If you were in,
Brian, do you realize that he lost his very first match against Steve Austin 6 days?
I know, I saw it live. I saw it live, and I was like, I was confused because I thought there's no way he can possibly physically hit a Stone Cold Stunner on the Big Show because it just wouldn't physically be possible. And he did it, and Big Show sold it and lost. And I was thinking like, oh man, I don't know what just happened.
And he's dead. And then he loses to Mankind by DQ 6 days later. I think he lost another match on Raw. I mean, the guy was. It's just. I can't believe that he lasted as long as he did, given how he started. Because, I mean, they signed him to a 10-year contract. I remember it was a huge deal, and he ends up pretty much outlasting both The Rock and Mankind in wrestling, and that's pretty crazy to me. But yeah, the pop for the double people's elbow was incredible. Like the fans definitely wanted this moment. They were clearly very, very excited to see The Rock and Mankind as a tag team win the WWF Tag Team title. The match is really, I mean, it's very much a Raw. It's like a slightly elevated Raw main event from this time. It's not great. It's pretty much what you would expect out of a match like this. And yeah, I mean, again, Vince Russo, the Raws in '98 and '99 were never known for their great wrestling. Like, there are definitely a lot of notable main events with Steve Austin and The Undertaker, Steve Austin, Kane. You know, there's some very highly rated main events, but I mean, the work rate was not there.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate because I think Undertaker would do a Buried Alive match a week later, taping it for SmackDown. Again, he hardly did anything in that match either, and I think that was the true final match before his vacation, so to speak. But looking back, I think it's the crowd pops that you want to look for, especially like in this era. And I think this match gives you that, and then some. And there's a lot of excitement. And I would also recommend checking out the segment in the middle where they come together. And I think this might be one of the few times that Mick Foley wears blue sweatpants. And I thought, like, wow, this must be a special occasion or something, because he usually is like wearing black or something.
In terms of in the ring, you could tell Mankind is on the way out because his match quality goes down precipitously in the fall of '99.
Yeah, that was another thing in his book too. Or was it? I forget if it was in his book or one of his books, but he
definitely writes about this time like he's the most.
Like Vince is like telling him like you need to stop for your own health, not. So yeah, it was.
I remember him stating like he said his match quality was in the shitter.
And he was kind of not moving well at all, and you can kind of see in this match, but he was able to hit that elbow. So that was the big pop, and just like 48 Hours gives you that big pop at the end with them killing all the bad guys and these guys beating the Big Show and Undertaker, and everyone goes home happy. And that's kind of the match in the movie. So that was the right match, folks. Out of the 5-star rating, so to speak, it's probably like a 2.5, but on the entertainment level, it's about a 3 in terms of the crowd pops and stuff.
Yeah, it's fine. Like I said, I mean, you could do a lot worse with some of the Raw main events from this time period, but yeah, nothing to write home about, really.
So next week, it's another Eddie Murphy classic, early 80s period. It's a movie we kind of dance around but never fully talked about, and it's a good chance to finally talk about it. Trading Places. We can have a discussion about Dan Aykroyd, and I don't know, this
idea about problematic movies, let me tell you.
Well, this idea too that people thought that Dan Aykroyd was going to be this big movie star, right? And he got so many opportunities that it just never panned out for him, I don't think, in terms of like.
I mean, if you think of it, I would disagree with you. Like, if you go to this and then Blues Brothers wasn't a huge success, but I would argue that he's very good in it. This movie, I think, is very good. He writes and is the star of Ghostbusters. I would absolutely have pegged him as a potential star. I mean, he got nominated for an Academy Award for Driving Miss Daisy, for God's sakes, and that is not a great movie, but like Dan Aykroyd was definitely a notable person, and I don't know. The calendar turned to 1990, and the party was basically over. Like, he starts doing like My Stepmother is an Alien was like '88. He's doing garbage like that. He's doing the Coneheads movie, which isn't good, and it's like basically the party's over. That's the thing about comedy, guys. It's like they have 10 good years in them, and then it can get ugly fast. I think Will Ferrell's learning that. I think it kind of happened to Eddie Murphy as well.
So yeah, we'll be talking about that and just kind of looking at both their careers. Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd around this time. Of course, Eddie Murphy's jumping on the rocket right now, and we'll have that Dan Aykroyd discussion because I just kind of feel like Grad Outdoors, Dragnet, like they tried so hard before they kind of gave up, and then the '90s happened. So we'll talk about that because I think people thought he had a lot of potential, like a person like Gene Siskel, who was really high on him on Dragnet, but then just shits all over him and all his '90s stuff. So yeah, that's an interesting discussion to be had.
He was in some really bad stuff in the '90s. Like didn't he do a movie with Rosie O'Donnell that's like one of the worst movies of all time?
Yep, I saw the review just recently on YouTube, and it's a sex comedy, and yeah, it does not. It's not even sexy.
I say this with all due respect: a sex comedy with Rosie O'Donnell is a really terrible idea.
That's what the critics said as well. So there you go. But we're not going to be talking about that. We're not going to be talking about Trapped in Paradise ever on this podcast, other than this moment right now, possibly a moment or two next week. But yeah, I'm really excited for Trading Places. Jamie Lee Curtis, of course, is awesome. She just won the Oscar, despite some people not thinking she deserved the Oscar, but she won it anyway. But yeah, we'll be talking about that next week. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again soon.